Hello and welcome. I'm Melinda Akinlami. Tonight, federal lawmakers threaten to invoke constitutional powers against the president should he fail to check security and political harassment issues. Defense Minister Mansour Dan Ali calls for the suspension of anti-open grazing laws in affected states as security chiefs meet with president for over 5 hours. Environmentalists around the world focus on how best to combat single-use plastic pollution in celebration of World Environment Day. And Iran threatens to increase uranium enrichment if 2015 nuclear deal falls apart.
And on business news tonight, French car maker Peugeot unveils plan to commence vehicle assembly plant in Nigeria in the first quarter of 2019.
On sports news tonight, former world #1 Novak Djokovic suffers shock exit from the French Open after a surprise loss to Italy's Marco Cecchinato.
And from Abuja, a federal high court in the city strikes out a suit seeking disclosure on the cost of President Buhari's medical treatment in London last year.
We begin tonight from the nation's capital, Abuja, where another face-off between the National Assembly and the presidency appears to be brewing. Federal lawmakers from the two chambers have threatened to invoke their constitutional powers against the president if he fails to address some major issues affecting the country. These include the persistent killings of innocent Nigerians and the harassment of political opponents by security operatives. The resolutions were read out by the Senate President, Dr. Bukola Saraki, at the end of a joint executive session of the National Assembly in Abuja. Our correspondent, Linda Akigwe, tells us more.
Due to non-availability of the report.
It's the resumption of legislative proceedings in the National Assembly for the week. It appears to be business as usual in the House of Representatives, that is, until the majority leader makes an unusual announcement.
I rise to move that this House do admit members of the Senate to a joint session in the House of Representatives. Honorable Speaker, honorable colleagues, I so move.
The Senate President makes the same announcement in the Senate chamber.
The Senate also resolved to sit with the House of Representatives in a closed executive session today to discuss national issues.
An emergency executive joint session is a rare occurrence in the National Assembly. What we have had are joint sessions which have been open for coverage, but not joint closed-door meetings. Lawmakers leave the Senate chamber to join their colleagues in the House of Representatives for the joint executive session. At the lobby, journalists and National Assembly staff wait for the outcome of the meeting.
Yes, they say they are going to talk. They won't talk.
Nearly 3 hours later, the joint session ends. Senate President Bukola Saraki announces the resolutions of lawmakers in the two houses.
The security agencies must be given the marching orders to curtail the sustained killings of Nigerians across the country and protect the life and properties of Nigerians, as this is the primary duty of any responsible government. 2, the systemic harassment and humiliation by the executive of perceived political opponents, people with contrary opinions, including legislators and judiciary, by the police and other security agencies must stop. We also hereby reaffirm our earlier resolutions of the vote of no confidence on the Inspector General of Police, who does nothing other than preside over killings of innocent Nigerians and outright disregard for constitutional authority of both the executive and the legislative.
Lawmakers, in their resolutions, also sent a direct threat to President Buhari.
The National Assembly will not hesitate to evoke its constitutional powers if nothing is done to address the above resolutions passed today. Is this a true reflection of what transpired in the Executive?
But a lawmaker in the House of Representatives appears to be uncomfortable with a resolution reached at the joint executive session where both houses threatened to evoke its constitutional powers if nothing is done to address the resolutions passed.
I am not in support, and because many of us are not in support of threatening the president. Issue of the people are collecting signatory to serve the notice of impeachment of the president. We know it's there in the House. But we know nobody can afford to show us that they will come and impeach the president with them. Nobody will do that. Because there is no TUSA. I'm sure there is no TUSA in the House of Representatives because our group is strong enough to stop anything called impeachment.
The coming days will reveal if the National Assembly will make good its threat to evoke its constitutional powers if President Buhari fails to address the resolutions passed. Linda Akibe, Channels Television News.
Not everyone is on the same page, as some lawmakers have distanced themselves from the decision taken by the National Assembly's executive session. The lawmakers, under the aegis of the Parliamentary Support Group of the Senate and the House of Representatives, insist that they support the president, especially in his fight against corruption and insecurity, as well as his respect for the rule of law. The group, in a statement by its spokesperson, Abdulmumin Jibrin, asked the leadership of the National Assembly to remove the log in its own eyes before removing the speck in the eyes of the president. The group adds, and I quote, "The National Assembly should as well look inwards and address the issue of suffocating senators and members with dissenting or contrary opinion to coercion or extra-legal means. Every senator or member of the House who has corruption or criminal allegation against him or her should clear his or her name without dragging the entire institution of the National Assembly into the matter." End of quote. The group also says the decision, said to be the resolution of the entire House, is just the opinion of a few lawmakers and would not be binding. Meanwhile, the Minister of Defense, Mansour Dan Ali, has called for the suspension of the implementation of anti-open grazing laws in order to reduce tension in troubled states. Brigadier General Dan Ali made the call in a statement released after a meeting with security chiefs with President Muhammadu Buhari that lasted over 5 hours behind closed doors. The Defense Minister emphasized the need for the police and the DSS to prosecute all the suspects arrested in the affected states, while negotiating a safe passage for the herders. Meanwhile, the Inspector General of Police revealed that in 2 weeks, a team would be deployed to Zamfara State to ensure more protection of residents. But he declined to comment on the vote of no confidence passed on him by the National Assembly.
Zamfara, because yesterday, even before this meeting, we met with the CDS and the other service chiefs and our chief of operations in the various services. And we have resolved that we're going to send a team, comprising of the military, the police, the civil defense, and most of these, we are sending them to Zamfara to ensure that we have maximum protection in that place. I think from what we discussed with the CDS now, in 2 weeks' time.
What's your reaction on the vote of no confidence that the National Assembly?
No, but you can't ask me now.
No.
I'm not the one that voted.
No.
Okay, thank you.
From security to environmental issues now, plastic makes up about 10% of all the waste we generate, and it's believed that by 2050, the ocean will contain more plastics than fish by weight. So as the world marks the Environment Day today, with Beat Plastic Pollution as the theme for this year's edition, coming together to reduce the single-use plastic pollution is the focus of all those involved. Our correspondent, Ayola Kazim, has more on the day's celebration.
Every year, the world uses up to 5 trillion plastic bags, and at least 13 million tons of plastics end up in the oceans, the equivalent of a full garbage truck every minute. So in marking the World Environment Day this year, governments, industries, communities and individuals come together and explore sustainable alternatives to single-use plastics. The Society for Environmental Toxicology and Pollution Mitigation, a not-for-profit professional organization, gathered students and environmental stakeholders in Lagos at a public lecture to commemorate the World Environment Day.
What we need are actual, tangible results which we all can bring to the table. And while addressing even academians, I would say it takes collaborative effort.
Manufacturers, there's a policy now, manufacturers need to start taking responsibility of the entire life cycle of their products. It's not just selling and then forgetting about, the waste.
Plastic is an incredibly useful material, but it is also made from toxic compounds known to cause illness. And because it is meant for durability, it is not biodegradable. It now creates problems for plants, wildlife and even human population.
Get broken down not into other bits, but into small pieces that end up in the stomach of organisms, in kind of fishes, whales and the rest of it, and they block the alimentary canal, so they're not allowing digestion of food to really take place.
On its part, the Nigerian Environmental Society partnered with the Federal Airport Authority of Nigeria to discuss how the aviation sector in the country can also contribute to the solution.
Well, just think about that meal they give to you, the bread, whatever it is they bring in that tray to you. They are all wrapped in plastics. All of that, where do they go to? And their destinations? Nobody knows.
We have been thinking of strengthening our recycling process, getting the refuse into those that are recycled, that can be recycled, those that are biodegradable, which can naturally get destroyed by nature itself. But most importantly, recycling those that cannot easily be destroyed.
Even children are not left out. The purpose of Bloomsville in Isheri North on the outskirts of Lagos send out the message, we can touch the world. It is a known fact that disposable plastic packaging is overwhelming our planet. Even babies are born pre-polluted by the harmful chemicals in plastics. And so the message on this day is reject single-use plastic and simply refuse what you can't reuse. Ayola Kasim reporting for Channels Television News.
Meanwhile, the Vice President, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, has also been speaking about the World Environment Day and has asked the major producers of fast-moving goods to use reusable materials as a more friendly alternative. Professor Osinbajo was speaking to mark this celebration in Abuja, and according to him, this move is crucial in tackling plastic waste, with Nigeria in a good position to lead Africa in beating the menace. Our correspondent, Gloria Omezuke, has this report.
The challenge of plastic pollution has become a notorious environmental subject over the years and a major challenge in the world's ocean. Hence the theme for the 2018 World Environment Day, Beating Plastic Pollution.
Put our hands together for our excellence.
The Vice President, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, at this gathering of stakeholders, quoted research outcomes as saying that plastics that have not been burned or recycled could be in excess of 4.5 billion tons, signifying a rise of plastics in oceans.
There are, of course, questions about the limited options for cheap packaging of food and drinks, especially where consumers are relatively poor. It's my view that for controlling the proliferation of plastic sachets, we must go back to the major producers of fast-moving goods to put in place recycling programs that could effectively ensure that while we seek environmentally friendly options for packaging, we are keeping the environment as free of plastics as possible. We expect that these consumer giants will make and fulfill these same pledges here in Nigeria, and also partner with governments, including the state and local governments, to ensure that we maintain the critical balance between economic growth and a safe and livable environment.
He announces that the Environment Ministry is partnering with critical stakeholders to develop a national strategy for phasing out non-biodegradable plastics.
In addition, the federal government is also collaborating with state governments to establish plastic waste recycling plants under the community-based waste management program in the ministry. We can beat plastics pollution, we can beat this epidemic, but we certainly will achieve our objectives much faster if we all work together.
The Minister of Environment, however, discloses a deadly reality if nothing is urgently done.
By the year 2050, there could be more plastic waste in the ocean than there are fish by weight.
The advocacy towards a cleaner environment intensifies here as the federal government and indeed stakeholders are called for more stringent efforts by Nigerians towards beating plastic pollution and indeed ultimately save human and marine life. From the presidential villa, Gloria Umezuke, Channels Television News.
In part two, after the break, we're being joined by an environmental expert, Professor Babajide Alo, who will be looking at the menace of plastic pollution on the environment. Please stay with us.